I'm Kohsuke, and I'm the creator of Jenkins, and I work for a company called Cloudbees. So today I wanted to talk about the Worflow Pluggin, which is one of the very new efforts that's going on in the community, and the one that I'm personally spending a lot of time on. So I think a lot of people nowadays are trying to do what we often call a continuous delivery, or maybe you're not using that term, but it often involves, I'm sure you have some automation, like a chain of automation that involves multiple things. So this is just, this is taken from one of the articles that another person and I co-authored. And then in this setup, so we are depicting a example of how the mobile front-end and back-end gets tested together. So you might not, do the same thing in the same way, but often you have, say, the build step that produces a binary, and then it might fan out to do multiple testing, and then it could join back up and then do stuff and so on and so forth, right? So this kind of, we started to see a lot more of these more complicated automation throughout the user. So we started, sorry, here, right? Let me see. Right, I think I'll keep talking with my keyboard so that it doesn't go away. So yeah, let's see what I was saying. Yeah, so we started seeing a lot of these automations, like complex automations among users. So sometimes it involves having these multiple stages inside a single chain of events. Or in some other cases, it involves launching a temporary server for the purpose of running tests. Let's say if you are developing a web application, and then, for you to be able to really do interesting testing, you have to have the application running. So with the advancement in technologies like PaaS and Heroku and so on, it's now realistic to just create one temporary server just for the duration of the pipeline. So that's, we started to see more of those. Or likewise, another use case that we wanted to support is where the deployment becomes a bit more complex. So you might have heard of tools like Chef and Puppet based on the convergence model. They try to bring the state of the system to the non-static state. But in some other cases, the deployment is a bit more tricky. So one of the use cases that we wanted to support is what the Netflix is doing, in which they bring up another clone of the production environment. It's called the Blue environment. And then they progressively move the traffic over to the new environment slowly over time. And then if at any point they discover some issues, they hit the red button. All right, so keep in that. So, and then it, if at any point any problem is discovered, they hit the red button, and then they go back to deployment. So something like that basically requires a lot more choreography and coordination between different environments and so on. So we wanted Jenkins to be able to kind of drive things like that. Another case might be parallel test execution, which also involves planning out the execution. But often we discover that some of the sophisticated users are actually looking at the test code and looking at the result of the previous test runs to basically dynamically determine how many test executions they fork out into each time and then bring them back up. So if you think about logic like that, you'd imagine that the defining structure statically no longer is not sufficient. So these are all the use cases that sort of went into designing the Worflow Pluggin. So when you try to, we try to sort of decompose those into kind of primitives that we think are useful to support. And then so I think in our observation we see that, the pipeline tends to be often non-sequential. So when we use the term pipeline, you might mentally picture like a single line of things, but you probably already know that the reality gets a lot more complex than that. Another thing is, now if you're talking about this kind of workflow / continuous delivery kind of thing, from the beginning to the end, you're talking about a lot of time. So, we wanted to make sure that if workflow runs for, let's say, like 2 weeks, in some large companies, the release process still takes come per week. So we wanted the single workflow execution to be able to keep running for 2 weeks. Right? And that puts the interesting challenges. Or in other cases, the workflow support would need some human interaction at key points. Especially when one of the sessions in the Jenkins user conference was about this company doing the continuous deployment, and they said so long as the code changes, they're happy to deploy to production automatically. But whenever the database schema changes, it has to pause, and the DBA would have to come in, make sure that this is not going to result in something horrible, and then they have to sign off before the rest of the deployment process is proceeded. So that's like an example of having a human interaction between otherwise automated, the chain of events. So these are the kind of things that we think the workflow would have to support. So coming back to the picture I put a few minutes back. Today, if you want to do something like today, it's certainly doable, but it often doesn't look as pretty as it should be. I think most people what do is to take these blocks and then turn each block into a job on its own, and then you can use any number of different plugins to basically combine them together. And so that's how most of the people are doing it today. And on one hand, it's great that it does work, but at the same time, this has a feeling of like the assembly. So you need to provide the assembly. Like all these pieces, there are like a 900 odd plugins that you could combine. On the other hand, you have to put them together by yourself to get the pipeline. And then it's great that again, these blocks are very versatile. So if you want to get the pipeline in any specific way, it could let you do that. You just have to put together the right pieces, but for some people, it turns out to be a bit too much work. So in the workflow plugin, we are sort of letting you define everything in one job. So what I just described here, you could actually do it in just a single job. And then that makes it a lot easier to manage and a lot sort of more recognizable when somebody is looking at the UI in Jenkins. And the second sort of key characteristic in this workflow plugin is that it's text-based. So it turns out that there are a number of efforts in the community to try to implement something like a workflow-like functionality into Jenkins. And then so we talked to these people, and then they learn from their experience. And then one of the plugins is called Worflow Pluggin, and if you're using Jenkins, you might have already heard of it. It's done by a guy. It's done by a friend, so there's extra reason for you guys to look for that plugin. And then that was text-based, and then we see a huge uptake in that plugin. There was another plugin that's sort of based on the graphical definition of the workflow. So the guy embedded the BPMN workflow engine into Jenkins. It even comes with the script IDE so that you could drag and drop your workflow, design them. But it turns out that one didn't get too much attention. So in the workflow plugin, we are sort of basically following the success of the Worflow plugin. So it's entirely based in text. And then so what that means is, well, you could put this into the version control system. You could manage who changed what and keep track of the history as you change these things. And then the way, I'll show you a bit more interesting example later, but so the way this defined workflow is that it's basically like executes like a program from the top to the bottom. And it's a language, DSL built on top of Groovy, the language of choice apparently in the Jenkins community. So what this does is like, okay, so the first, the Jenkins, give me a new node that has the Linux label, and then on that computer, I'm going to check out the source code from this repository, and then run the Maven script. And here, I'm going to run this part and then that part at the same time in parallel. And then when both of them are successful, this is complete, and then move on to the next stage and so on. So you could imagine this could be used to create a very complicated choreography if need be. So I think, the fact, first, this, describing things in code, I think, is a current ongoing trend, right? You see the infrastructure, the code, and things like that. So I think this, you can imagine all the similar benefits here. But another thing I find it convenient is that, for you to define this choreography, you need various control flows. And then by using existing language, known as Groovy, you didn't have to learn how to do this. You already know how to do it too. You already know how to create conditional statements. You have all the access to variables and stuff like that. So all the familiar tools that you're used to is readily available here. And then another bit of magic here is that we execute this Groovy program in such a way that you could actually restart Jenkins while the workflow is running. So that's kind of really useful if you're talking about the delete process that spans that you use. So yes, and then a few more things I wanted to mention here is, if you often in a larger enterprise or in a complex environment, you often have the kind of the base workflow that let me try this again. So in large company, you often have multiple products or multiple components or multiple teams that they are supposed to be following more or less the same process with often some minor variations. Right? So in those environments, you don't want to have this kind of workflow script in every single Jenkins build. So you want to be able to create some reusable building blocks. So you want to build some abstraction so that you could hide a common operation. And again, in a language like Groovy, we have all sorts of means, like a class, function, things like that you could use to build abstractions. And we already know how to do that. We do day in, day out. So I think that's another key benefit of using a textual-based approach to DOT workflow. So this kind of idea, it really came from the Workflow Pluggin, where the Workflow Pluggin gets a step ahead, is you could actually, in this workflow script as you saw, you could ask Jenkins to give you another slave node. You could ask Jenkins to give you a workspace. So you could have a workflow that spans multiple computers from multiple workspaces at the same time. And that provides an awful lot of flexibility. So for example, for you to do a load generation test, you might actually need multiple computers occupied at the same time to generate a load and stuff. Now you could do that. Try doing that in the Jenkins today, and then it's a lot more beneficial. All right. So the restart is really the key. I think one of the key motivations in many of the design choices in Jenkins. So if you are using Jenkins today, you probably already know that say you got a one freestyle job that executes for 2 hours for the duration of that. And if for some reason you lost the communication with slave for whatever reason, or maybe you needed to restart Jenkins because you have to install the new version of plugin or something like that. Right? And then what happens is that when the things come back up, Jenkins didn't remember what that build in progress was doing, so you do declare the build as a failure. So if you're in the middle of 2-hour build process, and then you have to shut that down, you have to redo it from scratch again. If it's 2 hours, it might be okay, but some people would run like tests that spans multiple days, and then clearly this is going to be a very major issue. So in workflow, fixing this was as I said, was major part. And then to get to the sense of why this is so tricky, imagine, so this is the workflow script, and what we are doing is, all right, so we're going to call into this function, which basically just wait for 1 hour, and then imagine this is the actual build. And at the end, regardless of whether this succeeds or not, we're going to just clean up do some cleanup acts. So now Jenkins is here waiting for the sleep process to complete, and now you hit the restart and Jenkins will go down. And then when it comes back up, it will be still in here. And then so, after when it's completed, it will still be able to run the finally. So you can imagine that the normal way of running program wouldn't just cut it. So this is one of the key innovations in the workflow. So this is sort of like in the techy term, or in the computer science term, it's called the continuation passing style. Which is not, I guess, for the purpose of this conversation, it's not really all that important what it does, but it's a way of basically, you can think of it as another interpreter for Groovy programs, the one that reads the code that fits more explicitly. And then what we do is whenever we hit the safe sort of like a pause point, like, we started forking off a process, and then so now this workflow is not doing anything until that program finishes. And then at that kind of pause point, we basically persist the state of the program, including all the local variables, pause stack, and so on. And then if necessary, bring them back from that state at the end. So we use the Java serialization, a flavor of it for this. So we kind of rely on the fact that the most of the interesting variables that you use in your workflow is serializable. But again, in this kind of, you shouldn't be writing like a 3,000 line workflow script that you're doing clearly something wrong. So it still should be fairly high level. And then whenever you have to call into a complex code, you can call into the normal Java function to do it. So I think our hope is that most of these high level scripts shouldn't have any problem dealing only with the serializable variables. So that's the idea. And then, to make this also work, we sort of developed a new way of branching processes on the slave so that they keep going even after Jenkins slave or the Jenkins master is done. And then we sort of, have a way of communicating it while it's running. We could detect when it's done, or what exit code and so on. So long as the process is running, obviously if the slave that was running your test is, say, powered off, then your test also stops, so there's no way Jenkins can keep that going. But so long as the test process is going on, you can lose all the Jenkins-related processes, and that's fine. So that's the idea. And then this kind of functionality also allows to create the checkpoint functionality, and then that, I think I have more slides to describe that later. But that's something we are also adding to the Cloudbees, Jenkins Enterprise like Cloudbees. So the checkpoint is kind of interesting concept. So I wanted to illustrate how it works. So imagine, we've been talking about the long-running workflow. So imagine this like a workflow. Each box would take like 2 hours to run, right? And then, you start executing this workflow, one at a time, and so far things are so good. But if you're talking about like a release process, these things just does not run often. Just does not run frequently enough. So to allow you to debug this to death. So often, sometimes you end up with some kind of transient failures. Like maybe one of the server went out of this space, or maybe you had a temporary network issue, or any number of reasons. Say the one step would fail. So in this case, what you do not want to do is to, scrap this result and then go all the way back to the beginning and then you redo everything from scratch. That would be a lot of waste of the effort, right? So in the Workflow plugin, what we let you do is to create what we call a checkpoint. So here, the checkpoint is designated in the black box and the black dot. And then instead of going all the way back to the beginning, you can manually go in and decide, okay, I want to just restart from this checkpoint because I know after all that everything up to here was okay. And then this was kind of a good point to pause. And then so here, Jenkins, please, okay, I want to just resume from here. Don't go all the way back. Just do it from here. And then the Jenkins will override. And they'd be able to just execute the rest of it and then bring it back, bring it to the conclusion. And for you to do that, your workflow script shouldn't have to do anything. It's sort of magically bring back the state of your program after this point. Is what you could imagine that this is kind of the very similar technology that will enable us to survive the restart. And basically, that's what we are doing. So our intention is, this plugin will be able to provide sufficient flexibility to let you sort of do any kind of orchestration. Right? So previously, things like that often require you to put together, 5 or 6 different plugins. But now this is meant to be a single plugin to rule them all. So that's the idea. At least that's our hope, and that's certainly the goal that we are working towards. So now I wanted to show how this works, and in anticipation of the French keyboard being a bit painful for me, I to do this. Oh, okay, really? Okay, all right. Well, in any case, I prepared this here, so let me do it from here. So, let's see. So I have a Jenkins running here. So this is the sort of relatively simple continuous delivery demo. So I have a workflow plugin here. By the way, you can get the same demo in a Docker image if you want to play it. So here, the setup of this is that we are trying to implement so you should mentally picture a Java web app development. So this is a new, so we are using a new workflow job. So here, let me actually show you. If you wanted to create a new job, maybe instead of using a freestyle project, you want to just specify the workflow, right? So that's how you create the workflow job. I've already created one here, and it looks and feels like a regular freestyle job. I guess if I bring the font size to normal, you probably feel, I think this is something you have already probably seen many times. Now, the major difference is, if you look at the configuration page, really the first part does look familiar, that in terms of the build definition, the only thing we have is a DSL script. So since this is a kind of small area, I'm going to fill this up into a separate So let me walk you through a little bit. So the idea here is the first thing you see is the stage. It actually doesn't really add any meaningful things. This is just a cue for the visualization for the stage. So in the pipeline, often it's convenient for humans to think of it as having multiple distinctive stages. So all this is doing is to leave a cue for the visualization that I want to see from here up to here as the development stage. Okay? And then so first I'm calling the node function, which is basically asking Jenkins to give me a new slave. Here you could specify either the name of the slave or the label, or you could not specify anything at all and just ask Jenkins, give me whatever slave you have, I don't care what it is. And then here I am checking out the source code from the Git repository. For those of you who aren't familiar with Groovy, basically that you should mentally picture it like that. Right? So on this point, one of the things I should mention is that, so when I say Git checking out from Git, this is actually, this functionality is provided by the Git plugin that you probably are already using. So we are not really trying to reinvent the whole version control system support. We are only we're just trying to leverage existing Git plugin or the Mercurial plugin or the subversion plugin or whatever have you. And now once I've checked out the source code, I'm going to run the Maven build. So the sh refers to the portion of the shell, and then I'm going to archive the artifact as a build result. So this project is it's a web application, so it generates a WAR file. So I'm going to archive that. And then so at this point, I've done the build and then run the unit test and package the binary. So I consider the development stage complete. Sorry, I need to ask for the password again. Yeah, and then so now we're going to move on to the QA stage. So here, what we are saying, so it gets a little bit longer here, but basically the structure is that the parallel would start from here until here. And then there's a first section called the longer test, and then there's another section called quicker test. So what I'm telling in this workflow is that I want to run these two portions at the same time. And we're going to come back to this run with server, but this is a function that I'm going to define within this workflow. So this is not built into the workflow plugin. I'm just doing this in this text. But the general idea is, So I'm now going to test my web application. So I'm going to temporarily deploy this raw file to somewhere. And then after I deploy it, this body code gets the URL of the server that's temporarily deployed. And then I run, another Maven module. So imagine that this contains a test. And then by passing in this URL. So, and then at the end of it, this run with server function is going to shut down this temporary server because we are not going to need it. And then in this way, I can run as many tests in parallel as I want because it's sort of, it's elastic. So you can picture something like a Google App Engine or a Worflow or Cloudbees path or things like that. Okay, so it's that. So this wouldn't do that. For that, you have to ask Jenkins differently, and yes, you should provide that. There's also the effort of, Jenkins also has this Maven builder. So one of the to-dos for us is to also support these builders. Now, for this to be resumable, we need to launch processes in a little bit different ways. So so that there's a bit of work to be done in core for that. But yes, I think that's probably a possible detail for now. And I successfully tested it. So next, I want to stage this web application to the staging area. So that's unlike the previous test stage. Imagine that the staging area is a known URL so that the people could go look at it. So I'm going to come back to the deploy function later, but here I'm saying, okay, I'm going to deploy this one to the staging environment. And then at that point, okay, so I'm kind of done with my automated testing. So I'm going to ask the human beings to make sure, to see if this is ready to be deployed into production. So that's what this input function is trying to do. So what this does is I'm just going to ask humans, like, is this staging instance okay? Are you ready to deploy to production? And if I say okay, if somebody is coming in and say okay, it will proceed to the rest of the process. Or if it says no, I'm going to, no, this doesn't look good, then the workflow will abort at this point, and that's the end of it. And okay, so, but now if it says it's okay to be deployed into production, now I start the final stage of the execution, that is the production stage. And then on that, to do the deployment, I need to temporarily use some computer. So let's say run this on the master. And I run some kind of preliminary testing on the product staging environment, and unarchive as in, okay, grab the file that was archived into the workspace because now it's running on another computer. This workflow could pause in this state for like a week, for all I know. Right? So this and that happens in another place that we are doing that. We are unarchiving the file from Jenkins into the machine temporarily, and then run the deploy command to deliver this into production. So that's the general idea. And then as a supporting function, so in this demo, we are just using a single Jetty server with auto deployment. So when I say deploy it to temporary server, all it's doing is just like picking up a random name to deploy, and then return that URL to the body, and then execute that, and then finally at the end we're going to undeploy the app. So deployment and then deployment is just a simple copy and RM. But you could imagine that if it is again the Google or something, the GAE or something, there's a dedicated command to do this stuff. So I think the idea is still very much valid. So that's a bit of a long-winded description of what this is supposed to do. So I'm going to just start running it. So so this is actually showing how it's executing, and then each step of the way it shows you how it should run, and then now I think it looks like it's executing the test parallel. So if I'm lucky, I can catch these temporary, instances. God awful names, they're just referring to this application that we've temporarily deployed. So I think I did all this now I think the test execution is over. So if I bring it back here, and then we look at page, so all these temporary instance has been destroyed. And I think it should be now deploying into the staging environment. So now the workflow is pausing, asking whether or what to do. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to see the staging instance. Okay, it's kind of just good enough for me, so I say, let's keep the production. I'm going to deploy this. So I'm going to say, let's go ahead and do the deployment. And here I'm back, and then it's doing whatever it does to put it into the production. So it's back into the production, the one that we saw is now deployed to prod. So that's the idea. So, like I mentioned earlier, this does use all the existing version control system support. So you get the polling and all the other user goodies. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a change to this program. This is the application, so I'm going to say file. And then I decided on this script. But in this case, it's Jenkins User Meetup. And then if you notice, there's a polling setting here. Again, this you can use the familiar, the triggers and so on to start start executing this workflow. So since I made a new commit, I think I would have to only wait up to be able to see it. Now it started scheduling this guy. So what I'm going to do now is, while the build is going on, I'm just going to start Jenkins environment. So, like I mentioned, the workflow is capable of restoring itself while it's running. So imagine that we've been building number 2, right? And the test is still ongoing. So I'm going to just stand against it and post the restore. So this is the same thing as update. Should I do? Maybe I should disconnect and try to reconnect. Oh, okay. It was just slow. Sorry. For the reason it was really slow. So yeah. So so this was basically like me doing Q9 to Jenkins and then brought it right back up. And when it came back up, it's still building Q2. So it's smart enough to remember what it was doing. So now you just see what this guy was. Yeah, so I guess it had done with the hold, and now asking me the same question. So if I go through the staging, you see that now it contains the change that I just made. And alright, so I actually changed it. Just go ahead and do the deployment, and then go execute the rest of it, and then in more time the production environment should be reflecting the change. This is good, right? I think it's awesome if you're thinking about, alright, the processor takes a long time. No longer you don't have to wait until the weekend to update the plugin. You can do it right away. So that's what I wanted to do. So, and then, yes, the one final bit is that because, the things that the change log and so on, all the stuff you expect is supported. Alright, so that's the sort of like a user visible part of the code. And then internally, let me talk a little bit about how, how this works with the rest of Jenkins and so on. So, this is actually implemented as a multiple, like a suite of plugins. It's not just one, but I think right now 6 or 7 different plugins, so that different pieces can be reusable in different ways. So so far, everything I showed was based on the Groovy execution, like a CPS style execution, but that's actually a pluggable. So we made that flow definition and so on pluggable. So later down the road, if someone wants to do a GUI-based workflow, they could do that, and they could still reuse most of the rest of the pieces, like the version control system integration or that sort of stuff. And then, so the flow is what we call as the main workflow execution engine. So this handles things like, persist the state of executions, and it also, as it executes, it reads basically the trace of what it has done. So we allow it to produce generally speaking, the directed acyclic graph of nodes, and each node is like some kind of atomic operation, like forcing out of the process, and so on. And then we also allow this graph to capture some kind of structure. We saw this like a parallel step that force talk to two things and then do some substance and join, right? So there's clearly some structure in it. So we allow the node to capture these things as well. And then so each node is now can also have the additional metadata. So what we're seeing here. So this is one of the very like a preliminary visualization of the data, and then so each of the nodes gets the names to be displayed and the separate status and the control attributes and things like that. So each node has, the fully fledged decision in the Jenkins world. And then so we also intentionally separated the visualization from the core data model so that the other people can come up with more creative ways of organizing and displaying information, and that can be added very easily without hacking the workflow plugin, which is arguably one of the more complex plugins. The other pluggability is what we call the steps. So you saw in the workflow that I'm calling into a number of function-like things like Git or shell or the node or things like that, which sort of ties into Jenkins and do something. So that's what we call a step, and then that is also pluggable. So people could come up with more interesting primitives that the workflow could use, like a smarter forcing into parallel processes, or whatever you want to do with it is all possible. And then so that's we also provide the support for some kind of like a block structure. So some of the steps that I show, like a node step, that's support in a body, and that can be executed by that execution could be controlled by the step. So another step that we wrote that I'm not going to show you today is like a retry step. So you will automatically try the body execution up to a few times, and then if that fails, let's say more than 3 times, you just throw the hands up in the air and let's say I don't know how to recover from that, and so on. So you can write these steps as well. And then, so as you saw, I guess I probably should have also killed just to save and see how that behaves. But whenever you use that sh command to fork off the shell, that execution is durable, by which we mean it correlates a lot of Jenkins for the slave, and then the version control system I already mentioned. And even though this plugin can do everything on its own, from building and looking at the code to building stuff and running tests, we still think it's very important that this functionality provides the interoperability with the existing Jenkins. That's because presumably you already have substantial investment in various jobs and so on. So you might not be interested in throwing everything away and doing everything from scratch. So as you saw, some basic level, these things will run on the common Jenkins slate. And then the version control system plugins existing version control system plugins are all more or less usable in the workflow with small changes. They do have to be updated to reflect a bit of a generalization of the concept that had happened before. So we are going to roll out these changes in the near future. As I showed in the demo, the Git plugin is already converted, and so is the material plugin and subversion plugin. So by doing these 3 plugins, we are reasonably confident that the processes are very mechanical refactoring of sorts. And then, so we also wanted to let you, like, according to existing jobs. Right? So as a part of the workflow, you might want to reuse some existing jobs. So we want you to be able to say, go build that job, and then when that's done, go do the rest of it. So that's this actually was since then implemented. And then another important part is the Jenkins has a lot of publishers and builders, functionalities like sending email, posting messages to IRC, or that plugin. So we also wanted to provide interop with those, so that's also available. So that's there's also all sorts of interoperability that we're planning to provide. And then, unfortunately, some of these changes do require changes in the core to sort of generalize some concepts. So we've been implementing those, and then so as a result, the Workflow plugin really requires rather cutting-edge new release of Jenkins 4. So right now, I think the demo I run is 570-ish, and then I think the current release version of the Workflow plugin needs something like 560. So it's going to be a bit of time before you start seeing this in the LTS. But I guess that's the nature of the implementing new features. So all that basic stuff works. But in terms of some of the things we want to do in the future, so we want to help people put the workflow code into the version control system. So it might be that you have a source code already, and then so maybe workflow is simple enough that you might want to put it in there. In this case, in the GUI, we might provide you the standard version control system selection UI, and then assume that you have the workflow script in a normal file name. That's one of the things we want to do. In other cases, we also want to provide like a common area, library area inside Jenkins, so that you could define like a common functions, stuff like that in there, and then any workflow script would be able to see what's defined in there as a common library. So that would be also useful for you to define some kind of company standard build process. So what I'm trying to describe here is imagine, your company has certain ways, like your build engineers have decided that this is how each product should be built. And then, they all follow the same mechanism. And then perhaps you could define such process as this function that takes one of the body closure. And then if that's sufficiently standardized, maybe the only thing that the people in the product team needs to specify could be just the name of the repository. So these three lines become exactly what people have to write, not all that complex Groovy stuff. Arguably, it's probably a bit too much to expect the product people to write this kind of script in every repository. That's too much complexity. But if you could sufficiently abstract away this commonality, then this should be what it is, and I think that's what more manageable. So that's that. And then, so we wanted to provide, so we're still busily working on this functionality. So there's a lot more build steps need to be converted. So we started, doing the build step interop. So we converted things like a JUnit plugin and email X plugin. So those plugins are non-trivial plugins that's necessary for us to make sure that that interoperability exists. But once the basic stuff is done, the rest is a fairly mechanical process. So most of the rest of the community is set up. And then the user interface of this is still pretty bare bones. That's because we've been focusing on the core part of the digital program. But as the core of the material, we want to start working on the UI and dashboard and things like that. And then there's a separate and related project called the Groovy sandboxing. So in the workflow, I'm running a script that the user has specified. So, if the user is malicious, they might write something like that in their workflow. And when that happens, we don't want Jenkins to shut down. So we've been building a technology to provide this kind of sandbox. And we're already using it in some places, but we need to integrate that with the workflow style execution. So this workflow plugin is currently available in the GitHub repository, and then it's sort of, as I mentioned, it's kind of in a reasonable state that you could already start using. And certainly the syntax we believe is already stabilized. So, if you you can actually start writing workflow today. This plugin is in what we consider experimental update center. If you go to this Workflow GitHub plugin page, it shows you how to install this, or as I was doing this, you can run the demo Docker image, which comes with the same project, so you can experiment with it without writing the whole thing by yourself. And then, it needs a few, 578, not 77. But you need a fairly new plugins. And then our current goal is to aim for 1.0 in this year. So, so like I said, busily working on it. And Jesse Glick who's in Boston, and I are spending a lot of time on this feature. And, the Cloudbees, certainly the reason we are spending so much effort is this is one of the strategic efforts that the Cloudbees is driving, and I think it's going to bring a clean custom functionality to Jenkins. So that's what I wanted to basically talk about today. To drive all the points home, I think the Worflow Pluggin is drastically simplify the complicated orchestration that today's the automation demands. And then to do that, we need to define everything in a single job by writing essentially Workflow as a Groovy code. And then this has a great characteristic that it survives a lot of JVM, including the restart from the checkpoint, and the whole thing is designed to be very extensible. So we should be able to allow people to build lots of interesting stuff on top of it. And this is the URL that we need to know. All right? I think that's it.